Alright, let's talk briefly about Palantir and the revised targets that they had for commercial revenue, because they were increased. And that's one of the original theses that I had with regards to Palantir. Followed the stock for a long time. I was close to selling it when growth was at 20-something%. Always maintained that I wanted to have a 40-something% target for revenue growth. And now the company is performing in line with that. So just amazing news for investors all around. Spent half an hour, 40 minutes, something like this today, just going over the earnings report as well. And I found one red flag and a lot of green flags. So let's tie that into it as well, because I can't just do storytelling. I have to have some numbers to back everything up as well, to make it more relevant for you guys. Alright, so Palantir, they recently revised up the revenue targets for the commercial side of the business. So non-government contracts basically. And in this case, the use case that I saw for Palantir when I worked at Dell Technologies back in the day is that a lot of companies, they have these massive data lakes that, they have their applications, they host them, and they need some data to power it. And they just collect massive amounts of data, but they don't really use it that much, to be honest. And within organizations, you have the data science team, they have a lot of work to do, they create dashboards, they try to help out as best they can, but there's not a whole bunch of them, and the value of the insight is a lot higher if you get it quickly rather than slowly. That stock that you have in your warehouse, it's gonna be rotten before data science has completed everything and sent out the report to management for them to act on it, for them to tell the sales force basically that, alright, we need to move these goods before they spoil and give a discount to customers, and then the sales force moves it. So speed is everything in business, and value creation, well, Palantir claims to monopolize that now. I think that there could be a use case for this, yes indeed. And tapping into these data lakes, one of the things that some people might say is, well, what about all the LLMs? What about Grok? What about the Google one? What about Llama from Facebook? What about ChatGPT? Well, we know that enterprises, they are very careful about their data, and they are very hesitant to just plug that into some LLM. We've seen, for example, Microsoft warned some of their coders not to put in internal information into, for example, ChatGPT, because there's a chance of leakage, and this can be very dangerous for enterprises. So they are very careful. The security constraints, the frameworks, the regulatory demands, they dictate that in some cases they gotta have it on-prem, and in other cases they can't leak it to applications like this. So they need some sort of software that they can hook up to the internal data lake. And you might have heard the term data lake before, because Alex Karp has mentioned it on earnings calls. I don't think that he has explained a lot, what it means. He hasn't really gone into detail, data lake. He hears this from customers, and then of course he mentions it on earnings calls as well. But if you work in the data center industry, well then this has been a thing for years. A lot of file data, a lot of object data, it's been building up in organizations. In some cases they might have some site for production in, let's say, Hamburg, Germany. They run some sort of application over there, and they just have a separate platform that runs it. It doesn't communicate with other platforms very well, and they have some energy site somewhere else, and it's just a mess. You have silos, they call it, siloed data, and this is where Palantir can unlock that value in the commercial segment. And I think more enterprises are starting to realize this with the big deals that Palantir has signed with some of the banks, and they see that, alright, this unlocks value, well, we have to get on board now, Otherwise, competition is gonna get more profitable, and eventually we will be outcompeted. You know, it's a tough world in business. You either just barely survive or you thrive, and in this case Palantir helps unlock the value. Alright, let's talk a bit about the valuation as well before we go into the red flag here. I see a lot of dividend investors, they make some post and they just quote the all-time highs and they say, how does this make sense? This does not make any sense. What about valuations? Well, if you're using a value investor toolkit on a growth stock, then it's not going to make sense. In terms of growth, we tend to look at something called the rule of 40, and this basically means that, alright, you want to have the margins together with the revenue growth to be at least 40. And in this case, Palantir has 80 something. I think it was 84 or 86 or something like that. And this rule of 40 for Palantir has been increasing 3 quarters in a row. So it's just crazy, not only revenue growth but also expanding margins in this case for the company. And why does this matter? Well, revenue growth is not created equally. You could potentially have a business, let's say I sell cups of coffee on the street corner, and I sell them for $4, the cup costs $1, the coffee costs $2, and then it costs $0.50 for an employee, only making $0.50 for each cup of coffee that I sell. Well, that's not huge margins, if you compare with software. And if I just scale this massively, that's fantastic, but it's not going to be as profitable for investors as, say, I scale Palantir that has margins of 80 something percent in this case, crazy margins. I think I did some calculations. I think they had it was something, imagine that you buy something for $16 and then you sell it to somebody else for $100. That's the type of margins that we talk about in the software business for Palantir. So just crazy margins. And when you look at this with value investor eye and you see, alright, growth in total in this case was 39% quarter over quarter in total, almost 40% revenue growth quarter over quarter, and then you just say, how can this be valuable? How can they pay so much for this? Price to earnings is almost 1,000. Well, this multiple is going to come down a lot as the quick growth earns them a lot of cash. In fact, this actually segues into the red flag. The problem that I saw when I looked at all the earnings papers from Palantir. In this case, I looked at cash on hand, comparing the first quarter of last year to the first quarter of this year, and I saw that Palantir went from having 500 million American dollars in cash on the balance sheet for the first quarter of last year to having $1 billion in cash on the balance sheet for the first quarter of this year. So the problem here, the red flag, is what are they gonna do with all that cash? This is actually starting to worry me a bit. Why? Well, we have to get some sort of return on that investment. They can't just hog it on the balance sheet. They have to invest it in R&D. Sure, that went up by a little bit, not a lot. They have to perhaps do some SPAC investment. We've seen how that went in the past, They have so much cash, they can do that. They could pay it in dividend, sure, but they have to do something with it. It can't just sit there and collect interest. Pay off the tiny debt that they have, perhaps. Doesn't really make a lot of sense either. I think that one of the things that I would like to see as an investor with almost 1,000 shares in Palantir is that I would like to see them hire more salespeople and expand the sales force to just try to get more contracts, and not only sales people, also sales engineers, train them and just be able to be in more deals, run more sales cycles. We've seen quick sales cycles for this type of enterprise software. It's quite unheard of, you know. They mentioned in the earnings call that they were able to run a sales cycle on an inbound in 3 months, you know, from start of getting this lead to actually closing it. And as somebody who works in high complexity deals, you know, this is just insane. Palantir, they keep impressing me, you know, from being an investor and looking at the business and how the business performs. We also saw Alex Karp being there when Trump was doing some business dealings in the Middle Eastern region, him together with Nvidia and AMD and other prominent company leadership. And interestingly enough, all of those companies had some very green days. So I guess if you want to look at sentiment, just look at the companies that have the leadership in places where deals are being made, and perhaps it can give you a hint as to where the stock exchange is going, perhaps. Alright, that has been it covering Palantir. I hope it made a lot of sense when I talked about the commercial side of things. This is recent news with them increasing guidance for commercial revenue, and the data lake part of it. I try to explain it as best as I can. It's quite a complex part, I think, to wrap the head around. It has taken some years to really get into that part, but you know, after 8 months at Dell, I was able to realize this from working on all these IT projects, and I could see a fit in the enterprise software stack for that, and I just went all in with the money that I had back then, and man, thank God for that. Alright, that's been it for this video, and as always, hope you guys make a ton of money, whatever investments you decide to make. Take care now, bye bye.